In 1995, the book Little Girls in Pretty Boxes is published. In the book, Jurian Ryan discusses all the problems in elite gymnastics and figure skating. She discusses physical and emotional abuse. The book has a small section on sexual abuse, but does connect it to elite-level gymnastic coaches. This book makes headlines because it is the first time that gymnastics culture has been exposed to the public. Joanne Ryan is blacklisted from the gymnastics community. In 2011, John Geddert begins to face police investigations related to assault and battery, which is kept from the public. That same year, Michaela Maroney would witness one of the worst memories while at a meet in Tokyo. On the flight there, Nassar gave her some sleeping pills. She recalled waking up alone in Nassar's room, not remembering how she got off the plane or arriving in Tokyo. When she woke up, she was crying, laying naked on Nassar's bed with him on top of her. Nassar was penetrating her while rubbing his penis up against her. "I thought I was going to die that night," she stated to NBC years later. That following day, John Geddert, national coach, drove Alicia Sacramone, Aly Raisman, Michaela Maroney, and Jordan Weber to practice. John Geddert was in the front passenger seat, while other gymnasts were seated in numerous rows of seats in the car. "Last night, Larry was fingering me," Michaela blurted out. There was a noticeable gasp, as recalled by the book Start by Believing. Raisman recalled Michaela describing in graphic detail what he had done to her. The night before, they were alone in the hotel room. Jordan also remembers the graphic detail. Alicia Sacramone was stunned, not believing her. When the author of Start by Believing reached out to Alicia, she declined to comment on the story. In June of 2012, Dominic Moceanu released her book Off Balance, which exposes Bella and Marta Caroli, hoping to spread change of their current status along with the ranch's abuse. Instead, she is shunned from the community, and the book is overshadowed by the upcoming Olympics. July 2012. Rita Weber publishes a book for advice on parents whose child is in the elite level sport. In the book, she interviews Larry Nassar on injury awareness and recovery. She speaks highly of him in the book, since he has seen Jordan over the years in her career. August 2012. Shortly before the Olympics, USOC Managing Director of Sports Medicine Bill Morrow became aware of Nassar's practice back in Michigan because sometimes he would treat minors alone with nobody in the room. He became concerned and confronted Nassar about his treatment protocol. Morrow did not like him treating athletes alone and requested a chaperone during the games. Nassar replied that Marta wouldn't allow him to treat gymnasts next to other athletes. Morrow continued following up with Nassar during the games, where he treated athletes next to other trainers. He felt his treatments were okay, since he was never alone at the games that he knew of. While listening to the book, Start by Believing, I read the worst story that I had ever heard from this investigation. During the Olympics one night, Michaela Maroney was being treated by Nassar in a hotel room where all of USAG staff was staying. It was in a public lobby next to USAG that was set up for trainers near Kathy Kelly's room. Raisman and Weber were alone in their hotel room when Michaela texted them. "Larry has his fingers all the way inside of me. Come down and rescue me." The girls immediately went down to the lobby, hoping that if they were in the room, that he would stop touching her, or at least she would feel better since they were in the room with her. September 2012. While on the Kellogg's tour, a top security for USAG became concerned when he saw Nassar being allowed to treat gymnasts alone without a chaperone. One of his rules as security was not allowing men who were trainers to treat gymnasts alone without another female present. He trusted Nassar's treatment, but didn't like that a man was alone with women, especially since they were mostly minors on tour. When he brought up the idea of bringing in more female security, the female trainers working with Nassar declined his help. The female trainers would deny this conversation years later. In 2015, Olympic hopeful Maggie Nichols would have to talk with her coach after returning from a monthly workout at the Caroli Gym, at the Caroli Ranch. Being on the current national team, Nichols grew very close to not only the other girls on the team, but also with Marta. So much so that Marta featured her in commercials and talked highly of her during meets leading up to the 2016 year. However, things would slowly change. Upon returning to her hometown, she would tell her then coach, Sarah Jauncey, that her and others on the team, like Allie Raisman, were being abused by Larry Nassar. Maggie said that she felt uncomfortable because he had also sent her private messages on social media complimenting her body when she wore a prom dress. Jauncey contacted USAG in June of 2015 and was told by Rhonda Fain, former Olympian and vice president, that she would send information over to current President Steve Penny. Steve was to deliver information to the FBI, but did not. Steve Penny decided that the correct action to take for the organization's well-being was to hire a private investigator and not to get the police involved. This investigator would interview many gymnasts, including Raisman and Nichols. In his eyes, he thought that if it would be sent to the police, that it would damage USAG's image. Because the 2016 Olympics was under a year away, the last thing the organization wanted was poor publicity. So, Steve kept it inside of the organization as long as he could. While Mr. Penny did indeed report Dr. Nassar to the FBI, he did so 5 weeks after learning of the allegations from Maggie Nichols. John Manley, a lawyer for many of the victims in the case, said that more than 50 girls had been abused by Dr. Nassar during that time. In a July 29, 2015 email that Mr. Penny sent to Mr. Abbott, who he addressed to as Jay, who was head of the FBI, said that Mr. Penny sought his guidance on a proposed statement to the news media and a draft email to Dr. Nassar. Below are 2 pieces of communications strategy to move forward, he wrote. We want to share them with you for your quick review to be sure that we are consistent with FBI preferences. Please let me know if you can concur with our messaging. He said, with regard to the USA Gymnastics role, the question here, Jay, or whether or not we should say we will cooperate or is cooperating. Mr. Abbott responded, I concur with you. Below, proposed media statement as provided, will cooperate. And given the assessment stage of the FBI's involvement, I do not see any issue with your proposed communication to Dr. Nassar. Most of the emails between Mr. Penny and Mr. Abbott were copied to several other FBI officials and a lawyer representing USA Gymnastics. In another email, Mr. Penny told Mr. Abbott that USA Gymnastics had heard from Dr. Nassar and planned to respond, but not without FBI's approval. Respectfully, may we assume that if we hear nothing further by 10 a.m. on Thursday morning, that we may respond as previously communicated, Mr. Penny said. Mr. Abbott responded, certainly respond as you deem appropriate. In a number of emails between Mr. Penny, Mr. Abbott, and other FBI agents, Mr. Penny appeared to be helping schedule FBI interviews with some of Dr. Nassar's victims. In others, Mr. Penny sought guidance from Mr. Abbott on how to handle Dr. Nassar. In response to one of Mr. Penny's emails on July 30th, 2015, Mr. Abbott wrote, you certainly are able to advise Dr. Nassar as you deem appropriate, and we are in no way want to hinder that or lead you to believe that you must follow an FBI protocol through the FBI will not confirm or deny any ongoing investigation or assessment. Days later, Mr. Penny wrote to Mr. Abbott, I would like to catch up with you and your team as soon as possible regarding Athlete C. Is there any appropriate time to call for a visit in the next few days? In an August 12, 2015 email, Mr. Penny wrote to an FBI agent, Michael Langman, that USA Gymnastics was getting close to next steps with Dr. Nassar following our event this week, so one way or another, it would be helpful to have more perspectives on this at your earliest convenience. In another email to FBI Detective Mr. J. Abbott on July 30th, 2015, Mr. Penny wrote about a very squirmy Dr. Nassar, saying, our biggest concern is how we contain him from sending shock waves through the community. Mr. Penny added, right now, we are looking for a graceful way to end his service in such a manner that he does not chase the story. What prompted Mr. Penny to describe Dr. Nassar as squirmy was a response from the doctor to an email from Scott D. Himsel, a lawyer for the Gymnastic Federation, in which he told Dr. Nassar, "Because the review is ongoing, USA Gymnastics has determined that it is in everyone's best interest that you do not attend USA Gymnastics event or communication with USA Gymnastics athletes and personnel until further notice." A clearly agitated Dr. Nassar wrote back, "This does not make sense to me. Please, I would like to have more details of what is happening, who has made the complaint, and what the complaint is. I am confused as to what is happening here." Mr. Penny then heard that two more national team members, the Olympians Allie Raisman and Michaela Maroney, also had concerns about Dr. Nassar. In an email to Miss Rhonda Fain, former 1988 Olympic alternate, Mr. Penny asked her to gain the trust of Miss Raisman and Miss Maroney, who he called Athlete B and Athlete C, so the gymnast would agree to be interviewed by the Federation's private investigator. He told Miss Fain, "Our preference is for them to meet privately with the interviewer and not to involve their coach or parents," a request that Miss Fain later told the Senate subcommittee had made her feel uncomfortable. According to Texas law enforcement officials and several accounts by former USA gymnastic officials, Mr. Penny tried to manage the case from the beginning. They said that upon hearing that Dr. Nassar was being investigated, Mr. Penny ordered the removal of Nassar-related documents from the Texas Training Center, called the Caroli Ranch. In September of 2015, Nassar made a public post on social media stating that he is retiring with USAG. He thanks all of those for helping him and recalls happy memories with former elite gymnasts. He stated that one of the reasons of his retirement was to spend more time with family. In February 2016, Mr. Penny wrote to Laura E. Miller, an FBI public affairs officer in LA, seeking the Bureau's help. Mr. Penny noted that he had talked to Mr. Abbott, who at the time was a special agent in charge of the FBI Bureau in Indianapolis and appeared to be in the thick of trying to handle the fallout of the case. "I am at home," Mr. Penny said in the email. "Spoke with Jay Abbott. We need some cover. Call at your convenience." Asked about the message, Mr. Penny's lawyer, Miss Maddie, said she had made the request because the claims that USA Gymnastics had not reported the allegations to the FBI. She said Mr. Penny and USA Gymnastics had reported Dr. Nassar's crimes in July of 2015, had responded to all of FBI's requests for assistance, had been told by the FBI that all necessary interviews had been completed. July 5, 2016, the book The End of the Perfect 10 is published. In the book, it discusses more than just the code of points, including a tweet sent out from Nassar in the early 2010s. In the tweet, Nassar says that Marta is a good coach because she gave ice cream to the national team for a successful meet. Nassar is frequently used in the book, backing up Marta by saying that she has improved as a coach. He says that injury recovery has improved because of his constant assistance, along with Marta constantly helping him by monitoring injury reports and checking in on elite gyms. A lot of things discussed in the book have not aged well, including Nassar's interview. I can't blame the author, though, because how would you know that this man is a monster? In the summer of the Olympics, Jamie Dancher realizes that she has been abused by Nassar. This is a piece pulled from the 2018 version of Little Girls in Pretty Boxes. In summer of 2016, I was working at a gymnastic camp in Concord, California, where my good friend and former elite gymnast, Melissa Genovese, asked me to have a conversation with Mike Lynch, a coach who was working at the camp with me. Melissa had been sexually abused by her personal coach, Keith Willett, but she had not yet spoken out against him. Melissa wanted me to ask Mike, who also knew Keith, if he had heard of any allegations of sexual abuse about Keith. When I started talking with Mike that morning in July, I told him some of the things Keith had done to Melissa. As I described some of his disgusting violations out loud for the first time, I suddenly realized that these were very similar to what the USAG head team physician Larry Nassar had done with me while I was training for the U.S. national team. I went to the Olympic trials that weekend in San Jose to hang out with some of my old gym friends, and I confided in Dominique Moceanu what Larry had done with me. Her response gave me the confidence and courage to act. She said she believed me, and that I needed to report Nassar. Dominique put me in contact with former Olympic swimmer Catherine Starr. Catherine had been sexually abused by her coach and later started an advocacy and educational nonprofit organization called SafeSport Athletes, a website where athletes could report instances of sexual abuse safely and anonymously. When I told her about Larry, she recommended I see an attorney she had worked with on sexual abuse cases. I was still filled with confusion and doubt. I didn't know what to feel or think about Larry's actions, and I didn't necessarily feel like a sexual abuse victim. But I understood that if Larry was really a child molester, then there were possibly other victims. During this time, I found out that Larry had resigned from gymnastics because of other allegations of child sexual abuse, and then saw on his Facebook page that he was running for a position on a school board where he would be working with children yet again. I thought about Nassar doing the same thing he did to me, but to one of my nieces or the other girls I coached. It was time to speak up. With my attorney, I led a civil suit against Nassar and USA Gymnastics. Fearful of brutal blowback from the gymnastic community, I was accused of a popular, influential, trusted doctor of sex crimes. I was led as Jane Doe. On August 4th, 2016, almost a year after Nichols filed a report on USAG, the Indy Star would expose USAG's handling of past sexual predators that were in the organization, which included people like Marvin Sharp. This story would spark major change in women's gymnastics. Maggie Nichols would not be selected for the 2016 team, though her parents would stay active on this case as they saw USAG go on to another team gold. On that same day, August 4th, Rachel Hollander would see the article being released. As a victim herself of Larry Nassar, she felt that the system had failed her just like many others. She felt that this would be her only chance to speak up, so she did. Rachel, who was a victim of Nassar's after the 1996 Olympics, would become the whistleblower in the months to come. On August 29th, Rachel filed a formal complaint with MSU police. At that time, there was one other report on Nassar from Jamie or Jane Doe. On August 30th, one day later, Nassar would be released from all MSU duties, including physical therapy. In the upcoming days, more people would come forward with the Indy Star and another civil lawsuit that would be filed. On September 12th, the Indy Star would discuss more victims of Nassar's abuse, including Rachel and Jamie, still anonymous, making this a public problem that USAG tried to bide for years. Later that day, USAG came out with a statement saying that Steve Penny fully cooperated with law enforcement immediately when they got the concern in the summer 2015, which was not true. They also stated that they let Nassar go following this complaint, which was also not true. On November 22, 2016, Nassar would be charged with 3 counts of sexual assault. At this time, there were over 50 complaints against Nassar. Nassar pleaded not guilty. On December 16th, he would also be indicted for possessing child pornography. During this time, USAG was fighting another one. Some gymnasts and coaches believed the victims, like Shawn Johnson. Some were told to stay out of this and were silenced, like Taryn Humphrey, and others defended Larry. In 2016, Mary Lee Tracy spoke positively about Nassar in an interview with WCPO 3 days after the former Michigan State University and USA Gymnastics physician was indicted on child pornography charges. We were all defending him because he has helped so many kids in their careers. He has protected them, taken care of them, worked with me, and he worked with their parents. He's been amazing. My Olympians have all worked with Larry, she said. We were all defending him because he has helped so many kids. There were claims that Donna Strauss backed up and allowed Nassar to confide in her when claims were first surfacing about his abuse. She believed he did nothing wrong, and that he wasn't capable of these things. On December 21st, Nassar would be denied bond and was found to have over 37,000 images and videos of child porn ranging from 2003 to 2016. On January 10th, 18 people filed a federal lawsuit against MSU, USAG, and Twistars for their allegations from 1996 to 2016. On January 24th of 2017, his license to practice would be suspended in Michigan. In February of 2017, Steve Penny would go back into a panic as child porn became more concerning with Nassar. As he did in 2015 and 2016, Penny would again reach out to the FBI for advice for USAG in persuading the team for help. Penny contacted Mr. Abbott and tried to persuade him to help Penny by stating that he may have a job available for him with the USOC as the head of security. Although the USOC was hiring, they would later go with Nicole Deal in July and not Abbott. But it didn't matter to Penny because his strategy wasn't to help Abbott, rather to form a close relationship to the investigators like he had done in 2015. Since at the time, there was media inquiry suggesting that he had not made a report in 2015, he needed the FBI's help once again to set a positive image for USAG. In March of 2017, after more than a year of delays, the U.S. Center for SafeSport opened in Denver. The nonprofit is supposed to operate as a rough equivalent of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, which polices drug cheating in Olympic sports. The Center for SafeSport was tasked with disciplinary investigations of abuse and will also regularly evaluate safety policies at Olympic organizations. The delays, the USOC has said, were caused by difficulties raising money and was unclear if the amount raised, at about $25 million for the next 5 years, will be enough for the potential workload. The Center for SafeSport has a responsibility similar to a college Title IX office, which investigates gender discrimination crimes on campus. As a comparison, the University of Maryland's Title IX office has a full-time staff of 7 to cover a population of about 50,000 students and faculty who live mostly on campus or nearby. The Center for SafeSport has a full-time staff of 9 and 4 contract investigators to cover a population of at least 13 million athletes, coaches, and officials that is spread across the country. The Center for SafeSport can act, however, only when it gets a report. The front lines of abuse prevention, USOC officials acknowledge, will remain the hundreds of thousands of local clubs and coaches affiliated with Olympic organizations, and the officials who oversee the sports communities. SafeSport officially went into full effect June of 2017. With the Center for SafeSport going into effect, less education was done on who to report to, since each NGB, or national governing body, of a sport has their own SafeSport organization. The Center for SafeSport oversees all national governing bodies organizations. USAG's SafeSport organization would confuse many parents when they began sending concerns over the next couple of years. During that same month, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California proposed legislation that would amend the Ted Stevens Act to make everyone who works under Olympic organizations mandatory reporters of suspected abuse and require stronger abuse prevention measures throughout these organizations. The bill passed after incorporating change recommended by the Senate Commerce Committee. While some people believed the act was long overdue, others, like Blackmun, felt that there was nothing wrong with the act. He was still in support of the bill and felt it didn't need to be changed. Others, like Suzanne Lyons, USOC board member, blame USAG, like Steve Penny, for their lack of preventing the Nassar outbreak. I feel like in hindsight, how could we let this take so long? All up and down that food chain, there were failures in the system that I think everyone regrets, Lyons said. The best we can do now is just to go forward aggressively. Lyons said that her fellow board members did not think that Penny had been aware of allegations against Nassar before the first known reports in 2015, but that, at the end of the day, it happened on his watch. And that's why we've had very difficult conversation with USAG gymnastic board members to say we don't see how he or the organization can recover from the magnitude of the Nassar situation. We think there needs to be dramatic change, Lyons said, who had previously shown support of black men. On March 16, 2017, Steve Penny resigned from USAG as CEO. He left with a $1 million severance package. In March of 2017, with Nassar's recent changes of child porn, many current and former political positions were asked to speak in private depositions. For former and current CEOs, along with presidents, they all discuss the Ted Stevens Act. Each of the three, which included Kathy Kelly, Bob Calarossi, and current Steve Penny CEO, repeatedly cited the Ted Stevens Act in explaining why they didn't investigate complaints unless they came directly from a victim or the victim's parents. When you have the umbrella of the Amateur Sports Act and the U.S. Olympic Committee, the burden of proof kind of weighs on your ability to move forward, because the coach is as much a member as the athlete is. The U.S. Gymnastics CEO Steve Penny testified. It made sense, Calarossi said of the policy, because the Amateur Sports Act protests the things, but also protects coaches, administrators, and officials. Penny also stated that while the act made it harder to move forward on abuse, USAG's investigation that do go forward is not required to publish a list of suspended coaches. USA Gymnastics noted that it has banded 37 of the 54 coaches in the files in 48 of the matters involving law enforcement. USA Gymnastics has hired former federal prosecutor Deborah Daniels to review its policies and make recommendations for change. In May of 2017, the Karolys would give their depositions regarding Nassar. Both would lie to the authorities. Bella stated that he did not like Nassar's personality, stating that USAG had guidelines and rules to follow that were not reinforced by former President Kathy Kelly. Others say that Kelly actually reported to Marta while at the ranch. Bella stated he didn't interfere with relationships between coaches and relationships like Marta. National team gymnasts who trained at the ranch have very different perspectives on who was in charge, though. Marta was the national team coordinator, but the way I saw it, she sort of had control over everything and anything that went on in the ranch, said 2012 Olympic gold medalist Jordan Weber. She knew what was going on every second in the gym. She knew how many routines that we did. She knew what we were eating. She knew our treatments. So it was just, when you go there, you know that Marta's watching. Everything you're doing, she's watching. Marta backed Bella's claims up. She stated she had little to do with safety and monitoring of Nassar's lack of license in Texas to practice. He reported to USAG, not to me. USA Gymnastics pretty much gave Marta Karolyi free rein because they wanted to win, said former Olympic athlete trainer Melanie Seaman. Seaman spoke with CNN and worked for USAG until 2006 and spent time at the Karolyi gym. Marta ran the show. The Karolyi's attorney, Gary Jewell, objected to 41 questions related to Nassar during the 3.5-hour-long deposition. During the deposition, she denied having contact with Nassar, and when it was very rare. I never questioned his therapies. During questions, she would change her answers when they would sound like she knew about the abuse. While that may be technically true, both Weber and Larson said they often observed Nassar speaking to Marta Karolyi, giving her reports on their physical conditions. They definitely had a relationship, said Larson, who described Marta Karolyi as a prison warden. She had no problem in showing that she picked favorites, so whenever her athletes were injured or had a problem, she'd be talking to Larry about it. Michaela Maroney agreed that Nassar should not have been allowed to practice since he did not have a license in Texas, though Karolyi's still allowed him to practice. I wanted them to be safe, but I had my duties, Marta Karolyi said in her deposition, and my duties were very specifically about the training and some other people responsible for other parts. In June of 2017, USAG publishes a PDF on how to report abuse. Deborah Daniels, who is accredited for the publishing, provides details on SafeSport rules, including tickling athletes. Though rules come out, people still continue to break the rules. Perry Davies, an Nassarian gymnastics coach, would be accused of tickling girls by making other girls hold kids down so he can tickle them wherever on their body. When USAG's SafeSport released the document, the gym made a mockery of it. Coaches started yelling out, "SafeSport! SafeSport!" when he tickled them as a joke to the organization's new rules. Perry would still continue to tickle girls under coach's watch. That same month, Steve Penny states in a deposition that he never liked Nassar and that many people in the gymnastic community knew the two did not get along well while they worked in the organization. In the deposition, it was also established that while president, Penny was verbally abusive to coworkers and higher-ups in the organization, once making a staff member cry in her office after speaking with him. On July 11, 2017, half a year later, Nassar would plead guilty to child pornography. At this time, over 100 people sent out complaints of him, and 23 more women and girls would join the federal lawsuit. On July 19, 2017, USAG would hire Toby Stark and Mark Busby to lead the organization and handling of the SafeSport matter. Stark would be in charge of athlete protection, and Busby in charge of handling information to USAG about potential abuse and direct investigations coordinated with SafeSport. Stark's background included an executive director for a child advocacy organization, whereas Busby was a deputy prosecuting attorney in Marion County for 13 years. That fall, Olympians like Aly Raisman, Michaela Maroney, and Gabby Douglas would use the #MeToo movement to announce that they were assaulted by Larry Nassar. This includes Maroney stating that she signed a non-disclosure agreement with USAG to stay silent in 2016 about the abuse through USAG. In Maroney's tweet in October of 2017, she discusses the Tokyo trip. As the Me Too movement became full force, people also began to expose twist stars more as trials became closer for Nassar. Geddert, who was head coach at Great Lakes Gymnastics, was one of the original adults who allowed Nassar to continue preying on gymnasts. Working back as far as the mid-1980s with Nassar, Geddert would later be fired from Great Lakes, though making the Male Coach of the Year award in Michigan. A reason he could have been fired was because of his long list of abuse, one dating back to 1986 when he pushed a teenager down a staircase and kicking him on his back. Geddert denied doing this when a police report was made, stating he merely escorted the boy out of the gym after he disrupted his class. Another male gymnast from Great Lakes also accused of him pushing the boy at practice. Geddert had other recounts, saying the boy was being disruptive. He said he grabbed the boy by the shirt and confronted him. He denies pushing the boy, stating the boy fell himself. In 1996, Geddert would open Twist Stars, former gym where Jordan Weber trained. During that time, he would allow his gymnasts to be molested by Nassar in a back room and once on record, came into the room while he was molesting a girl. Geddert did nothing, joking around with Nassar as he continued his treatment. While Geddert was a successful coach, producing his first Olympian, he was also one of the most abusive coaches in the area. Geddert was known as a coach who acted out in anger, throwing things at gymnasts and telling them that they should just kill themselves since they weren't good at the sport. One of those gymnasts said, at one point, Geddert called her a disrespectful bitch and told her that she should climb off the top of the rafters of the gym, jump off, and kill herself. Some of these gymnasts did actually attempt suicide. Others resulted in eating disorders as a way to cope with his anger. Years later, one gymnast would say that Geddert told her to lie about a suicide attempt because he was worried what it would do to his reputation and her ability to get a college scholarship. That former gymnast said that she stopped eating for a while after routinely being criticized by Geddard for her weight. Her experience at the gym led her to suffer from panic attacks. After she attempted suicide, Geddard required her to apologize to him and decided that she should tell others that she was just having an allergic reaction. Jordan Weber stated in the book Start by Believing that she recalls him throwing clipboards at gymnasts using foul language too. He once called her an idiot, but after a meeting with her parents, never used language with her again. In 2011, when Jordan was hitting her peak, one gymnast filed a police report that he had screamed at her and called her a white trailer trash. He followed her to the parking lot when leaving the gym and stepped on her foot, preventing her from getting away from Geddard. Another gymnast reopened a police report in 2013. An 11-year-old girl was pulled off of the floor from practice because she had a mental block for a tumbling pass and refused to do it. He took her to the locker room, away from everyone, stepped on her foot so she couldn't leave, and twisted her arm. He pushed her down onto the wall. Geddard also neglected injuries and forced additional conditioning when upset with gymnasts. Once, he pushed a gymnast so hard that the child had serious injuries, including ruptured lymph nodes and torn muscles in her stomach. The severity of complaints against Geddard were so severe that USAG hired a private detective in 2014 to investigate the numerous complaints made against Geddard. Another child who spoke at the Nassar trial said that she fell off the bars and cracked her C1 and C2 vertebrae. John Geddard neglected her injury, saying that it was a sore muscle, but like Karen Tierney, who hurt herself in the 1980s, a cracked vertebrae is not always obvious. When she couldn't get off the couch when she got home, her parents rushed her to the hospital. Doctors said that she was very close to being paralyzed. Later on, she would break her L5 vertebrae, resulting in a back brace, stating that it was common to see girls in back braces at that gym. Rachel de Hollander stated in her book that once she saw one of Geddard's gymnasts tumbling in wrist and knee braces. Everyone shook it off, with her mother stating, "She's used to working through it," referring to the gymnast fighting pain in her back and hamstring. One former office manager claims John and Larry were like this perfect storm, referencing that Geddard was also a pedophile. And this was true. One of the worst stories involving a 14-year-old girl who was followed to the locker room after practice with Geddard. Geddard threw her up against the wall when she was alone and began to grope and digitally penetrate her. During the assault, Geddard exchanged a very uncomfortable conversation, and the gymnast left the gym with bloody underwear. The child threw up several times, crying herself to sleep. You become so unapproachable that your own gymnasts don't feel comfortable telling you what's going on. There's no way any of these girls would have felt comfortable saying anything to John about Larry. Kids were terrified of him, and how could they not be? Both men were pedophiles, so there was no way that they could stop the abuse from Larry if the owner, John, was also participating in molestation. Lindsay Lemsky stated, "You, John, deserve to be sitting behind bars next to Nassar. Funny how you share the same characteristics." On November 18, 2017, the Washington Post exposed various Olympic sport organizations. It was found that over 290 coaches through 15 sports were accused of sexual misconduct as far back as 1982. One of them, 1984 Olympic coach Don Peters, was never faced with criminal charges. Until this year, the U.S. Olympic Committee resisted calls for changes to a federal law that has, at times, inspired flawed responses by Olympic officials to suspensions of abuse. Top officials at other Olympic sport organizations delayed reforms by backing at common child protection measures as costly and intrusive. And Olympic sport lawyers, victims advocates blame on influential firm in particular have instilled unusually strong fear of lawsuits that routinely arises when new child protection measures are proposed. Beyond increasingly safety and background checks, along with introducing SafeSport, little had been done since things had circulated around Larry Nassar. On December 7th of 2017, Nassar was charged with 60 years in prison for owning over 37,000 videos or images of child porn. District Judge Janet Neff stated, "He has demonstrated that he should never again have access to children." Because of Nassar's age, the 60 years serves as life in prison. In January 2018, USA Gymnastics suspended Geddard during Nassar's sentencing hearing in January 2018 amid a flood of public complaints from former gymnasts who described his abusive coaching style. Geddard announced that he was retiring from coaching days after he was suspended from USA Gymnastics. He transferred ownership of Twistars USA to his wife and coaching partner later that year. Simone would come out of the abuse she endured at the end of the year. All of those years, nobody ever told us what sexual abuse was, so we didn't really feel like we were going through it or that we were victims, she said. Biles described her experience to a friend and asked her if that meant she was sexually abused, and the friend told her it absolutely did. In January 16th through the 24th, following Simone coming out of the abuse, a victim impact statement trial was conducted against the People vs. Larry Nassar. On day one of the impact statements, the total of people set to testify was 88. At the time, the judge, Rosemarie Aquilina, had scheduled the trial to last for 4 days. Kyle Stevens was the first to testify in the case and was a family friend since she was the age of 5. Larry would molest and masturbate in front of her under her own house where her parents and siblings were present. Kyle's parents did not believe that she was being molested by a family friend that they had loved dearly. Years later, her father would commit suicide, and the family believed that Nassar's abuse was one of the reasons that he took his life. The father would not believe Kyle was being abused until years later and held strong regret for holding such a grudge against his daughter for accusing a predator for hurting her, even if it was a family friend. Donna Markham recounted how her then 12-year-old daughter, Chelsea, began sobbing in the car as they were headed home after a session with Nassar. Her daughter said, "Mom, he put his fingers in me, and they weren't gloved." Then begged her mother not to confront Nassar, fearing it would derail her gymnastic career. The next day, Donna Markham told her daughter's coach, who did not believe it. Markham said she also asked other mothers if her daughters had mentioned inappropriate touching by Nassar. "They gave me a look like, 'You're lying to me,' and she told the judge, choking back tears." But even when Nassar's abuse was reported to coaches and law enforcement authorities, many of them did not believe Nassar had done anything wrong, causing many parents and girls to second-guess themselves. Chelsea Markham quit gymnastics not long afterward and entered a path of destruction and self-loathing, eventually taking her life in 2009 at only 24 years old. "It all started with him," Markham told the judge. "It had destroyed our family. We used to be so close. I went through 4 years of intense therapy, trying to deal with all this, till I could finally accept the fact that this wasn't my fault." Parents couldn't believe what had happened to Chelsea. If a child and a parent had complained about Nassar, why wouldn't a coach listen? And beyond this, how could Nassar do such a horrible crime? Parents were shocked. He was a father himself. How could he hurt children if he had children himself? One victim stated she has suffered marital issues along with panic attacks happening for no reason, one happening at a grocery store when shopping for the family. On day 2, the victim impact statement took a turn by increasing in number. The original number, set to 88, was now at 101. The first person to speak was former national team member Maggie Nichols. Because Maggie was competing at Oklahoma, her mother decided to read her statement to the court instead of her being there. As her mother spoke in her daughter's honor, her voice cracked and fell silent, just like many parents who spoke for their daughter or child had felt. Broken, alone, scared, ashamed, and disappointed that they did not protect their child from a sexual predator. During her discussion, she gave her own testimony, which could have been titled, "A Real Doctor." She barked her words at Nassar as a registered nurse herself, whose husband is a medical doctor, of what a doctor's legal obligations and responsibilities entail, none of which Nassar performed on Maggie Nichols. "My husband is a real doctor. You disgrace yourself by calling yourself a doctor to the medical community. A real doctor has an adult present when working with a child. A real doctor gets parental consent. A real doctor, under no circumstance, would touch a child in their genital or anal area. A real doctor, if needed to be in the private parts, would wear gloves and explain everything that they are doing with their child with a parent with them. A real doctor, like I said, heals people and doesn't hurt. You are not a real doctor at all. You are a serial child molester." One father, who was not only a coach, but also worked in the medical field closely with Nassar, stated as his daughter finished her statement, "For the record, go to hell." Over two osteopathic surgeons in practice that worked with Nassar would express how shocked and deeply saddened they were. They were shocked because since they had known him for so many years, not just as a colleague, but as a friend, they couldn't imagine this happened. One victim said that, although she felt something wasn't right, that if she spoken up and told her mother, who was in the room when she was molested, that she would not get medical attention or continue doing gymnastics. She thought it was just how athletes are made. Some victims say that they were so young that they did not understand they had been abused until they were adults, so they did not tell anyone. As day 3 started, the impact statements increased by 4 people, bringing the total to 105. The first person to speak was former Olympian Jamie Dancer. During her statement, she discussed the backlash that she and others like Rachel DeHollander faced when coming forward about Nassar. Jamie Dancer was once called a liar and a whore by people online because they didn't believe her when she came forward of the abuse in 2016. As children, now adults, with very minimal minors who spoke, all expressed the mental health complications that they face from Nassar. Many people like Kyle Stevens, Adriana Guerra, Madeline Jones, and 2000 Olympic bronze medalist Jamie Dancer either had suicidal thoughts or was hospitalized for attempting suicide. A 2002 MSU graduate said that she graduated with not only student debt, but credit card debt because she went to bars so often to drink away the pain she had endured by Nassar. As the day went on, more gymnasts spoke in detail of how Nassar got away with abuse. Adriana Guerra said that she would be treated in the locker rooms and back rooms of Twist Stars, and still struggles because although she no longer does club at Twist Stars, that her high school gymnastic club trains half of their time at Twist Stars and is forced to relive those memories even after leaving club gymnastics. Some gymnasts, like Adriana Guerra, pretended to be on their period so that they could not be penetrated by him. As day 4 started, the victims increased to 120 people. 2012 gold medal Olympian Jordan Weber spoke first. "Our bodies were hanging by a thread," she stated when discussing how almost everyone on the Olympic team was abused by Nassar in London. "They all had to see him. They had no other option." Something that some may not know, but Jordan Weber's mother, a freelance journalist, wrote a book in 2012, ironically published by USAG, discussing tips and advice on how to be a good parent and keep your child in a healthy environment. I don't like that USAG was behind this, but this book does have some great advice that I'll reference throughout this project. Nassar was able to trick Weber's mother too, her even interviewing him for her book to discuss injury awareness and recovery. Because of his interactions with Twistars, where Jordan trained, her mother believed that he had Jordan's best interest. I have not added any reference of Nassar's work from that book because, in my mind, he was not a registered doctor and does not deserve to give medical advice to others. Parents who voiced concern says Nassar dismissed their questions. The mother of a 12-year-old victim said she questioned Nassar about not wearing gloves, and he answered in a way that made me feel stupid for asking. I told myself, he's an Olympic doctor. Be quiet, the woman said. The guilt that I and my husband feels that we could not protect our child, it's crippling. Allie Raisman also spoke shortly after Weber did. She was one of the first to fully expose both organizations and Twistar's neglect on people complaining. Larry, you do realize that we, this group of women you so heartlessly abused over such a long period of time, are now a force, and you are nothing. The tables have turned, Larry. We are here, and we have our voices, and we are not going anywhere. One victim, now a parent, who was abused decades ago, still struggles to sleep without a nightlight on. Over 3 women spoke of being abused at Great Lakes Gymnastics Club in a back room. One family, whose daughter was abused, said they had helped Dr. Nassar clean out his basement after a flood. They discussed how his nice guy charm was able to make them believe that Nassar had their best interest and could be considered a friend. By the end of day 4, over 90 people had spoken up, which included doctors, trainers, parents, siblings, and athletes. By day 5, the impact statement rose to 144. This did not include doctors, parents, or siblings. These were strictly former athletes that watched the trials over the past 4 days and decided that they too needed to speak up. They contacted last minute to make their voice be heard. Parents discussed how Nassar would turn his back to them to cover up the abuse. Many children were interested in being a doctor when they grew up around Nassar. Many also found that they no longer wanted to be a doctor and would get uncomfortable when going to medical appointments. Some struggled to go to an OB/GYN, giving birth even if it was a female doctor. For those who went on to medical school, which I believe was only 1 or 2 of them, they struggled to study medicine because all they could think about was what Nassar was doing when they opened a book. One gymnast was so brainwashed that when she married, her husband questioned Nassar's treatment. Though she was still seeing him without problems, he requested to go with her in the next appointment. She refused it at first, telling him that this was normal and that she wasn't being abused. But deep down inside, she questioned herself if she was being abused too. She wouldn't realize it until her 30s after battling an eating disorder that she was in fact a victim of Nassar's. On one of the last days of the hearing, many people were impacted with the last few testimonies. One gymnast stated that while at MSU, he asked if he could videotape her while he was performing pelvic floor therapy. I thank the little girl every day for having the audacity to say no when you are setting up that video camera. Her brother, a male gymnast, was treated by Nassar as a child in front of her. To this day, I'm not sure how his shoulder injury was connected to his balls. This poor gymnast also had witnessed not only her brother being molested, but her father passing away. Later, it would be revealed that at least 3 boys would be abused by Nassar, with 2 filing reports to police. Nassar realized that her father's passing could be a grooming tactic, and used his death to bring them closer together to build trust between the 2. She was one of the worst cases during the hearing, in my opinion. Students at MSU coined Nassar the crotch doctor. I willingly took my most precious gift in the world to you, and you hurt her, physically, mentally, and emotionally. She was only 8, said Anne Swinehart. I will never get rid of the guilt that I have about this experience. On the last day, the second to last victim, Kaylee, approached the courtroom. I was never so excited to see a doctor before. It was like going to see a celebrity, to get back to the sport that I loved. Your reputation was like no other. Seeing all the gymnastics posters and cards was just another reason why I thought you were so great. The last person to speak was Rachel de Hollander, one of the first to speak of Nassar's abuse, who was pledged to be a whistleblower. How much is a little girl worth? How much is a young woman worth? Larry found sexual gratification in our suffering. Even as young as 6 years old, he asked us how we felt because he wanted to know. Larry sought out and took pleasure in little girls and women being sexually injured and violated because he liked it. The fact that our sexual violation was enjoyed by Larry matters. The fact that our sexual violation was enjoyed by Larry matters. It deserves justice. And the sentence you will impose today will send a message about how much these women and children are worth. Larry Nassar was sentenced up to 175 years in prison by Judge Aquilina. She stated, at the end of the sentencing, that she would refuse media or press conference. Once she stepped out of that courtroom, she would only make public appearances if it was with a survivor because it is their story and not my own. It's about them and not me. Judge Aquilina was valued by family, athletes, and viewers for being patient and comforting to the survivors for each impact statement. She supported each athlete with compassion and acceptance that their problem would be resolved after Nassar's sentencing. Judge Rosemary Aquilina also told parents not to feel guilty for their failure of protecting children. The red flags may have been there, but they were designed to be hidden, she said. Paul Dorohanesian, a former prosecutor in New York who has written a book on sexual assault trials, said abusers in positions of authority often hold tremendous power over both children and parents. Some parents also fear what will happen to their child if they report abuse, and children often have difficulty talking to parents about anything sexual. It shouldn't turn to a situation where we have to blame parents, Paul said. On January 22, 2018, USA Gymnastics announced that its board of directors' executive leadership, consisting of Paul Perilla, chairman, vice chairman Jay Binder, and treasurer Bitsy Kelly, all tendered their resignation effective January 21, 2018. In a statement, USAG President and CEO Carrie Perry said the following: USA Gymnastics thanks Paul Perilla, Jay Binder, and Bitsy Kelly for their many years of service to this organization. We support their decision to resign at this time. We believe this step will allow us to more effectively move forward in implementing change within our organization. As the board identifies its next chair and fills the vacant board positions, we remain focused on working every day to ensure that our culture, policies, and actions reflect our commitment to those we serve. The USOC stated if the board of directors did not all step down, that USAG would no longer be recognized as a national organization, preventing them from receiving funds and support that they would need following the scandal. At the same time, USAG announced that they were cutting ties with the Karoli Ranch and that it would no longer be the National Training Center. On January 31, 2018, Nassar's sentencing begins at Eaton County. This final trial was one of 3 charges of sexual assaulting girls at Twistars. He faced a maximum sentence of life in prison. During the trial, victims from Twistars speak of the abuse. 3 sisters, Morgan, Lauren, and Madison Margraves, spoke of their abuse. The father, struggling to comprehend that all 3 of their daughters were molested by a man, held back his anger. I knew he was the best of the best, but my parents are heartbroken because my sisters and I are victims to you. The daughters, struggling with their mother to hold back tears, finished up as their father, Randall, asked to speak to the judge. I want you to grant me with 5 minutes alone in a room with this demon. The judge declined, which Randall resulted in charging after Nassar to attack him. Randall, given the situation, would not be charged for his actions by the judge following a brief court hearing. Judge Janice Cunningham sentenced Nassar to 40 to 125 years in prison on February 5, 2018. Upon being transferred to a federal prison in Arizona, he was assaulted by inmates. He was later transferred to Florida because of the assault. He would try to repeal his sentencing with no success. In February of 2018, Joanne Ryan decides to create an updated version of her original book, Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, detailing the 96 games injury, sexual abuse, and the fall of the athlete wellness program. She contacts Nancy Thies Marshall, asking what had happened to the athlete wellness program. According to her new book, Nancy gladly spoke with her. "You don't know what this call means to me," Nancy said. Nancy said over the phone that when the budget was cut, with Martha and Bella also encouraging this, that she quit in 2001. The two felt that her program would interfere with Bella's monthly camps. She said that in 2015, she was contacted by Luan Pejic, vice president of USAG at the time. Luan asked if Marshall would be interested in updating her wellness manual, which hadn't been touched since 2000. When Marshall angrily declined, it then went over to Teresa Kulikowski-Gillespie. Supposedly, Teresa updated the manual, but Marshall never heard of any updates. To this day, Marshall questions its timing. The original manual had a foreword by Larry Nassar, who praised Marshall's work in the manual. The year Luan contacted Marshall was the year that Nassar was reported to the FBI. She wondered if the reason it was finally being updated 15 years later was to remove Nassar from the manual. April 2018. Michaela Maroney speaks with NBC and CNN describing her abuse from Nassar. In the interviews, she discusses that she told her teammates about being molested by Nassar while Geddert was in the car, and that Geddert did nothing to report it. Geddert panics and texts his former gymnast, Jordan Weber, stating that he did not recall hearing Michaela say this in the car. Weber questions to believe if Geddert was telling the truth or not. When Penny testified before Congress in June of 2018, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right to avoid answering questions. While being questioned under oath, Penny testified that USA Gymnastics rarely forwarded allegations of child abuse to police or child protective services without being asked because of a belief that there was not a duty to report abuse if USA Gymnastics was a third party to abuse allegations and concern about damaging a coach's reputation if an abuse allegation was false. USA Gymnastics dismissed complaints as hearsay unless they were signed by an alleged abuse victim or a victim's parent. Officials of USA Gymnastics, which is headquartered in Indiana, may have violated Indiana state law by failing to report abuse allegations. July of 2018, Rachel DeHollander delivers her fourth baby and names it after Renee, a detective who helped with the Nassar case. September of 2018, an anonymous parent from Gymnasiana reported verbal, emotional, and physical abuse to USAG. This case would take nearly 3 years to close, with the owner since selling the gym to someone else. It is unclear if the owner, Sabrina Piku, is still coaching at another gym. That same month, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it was investigating FBI's failure to report Nassar's abuse. Jay Abbott was under investigation following his handling with Steve Penny. On September 17th of 2018, former USA Gymnastics trainer Debbie Van Horn, who worked with Larry Nassar for many years, was arrested at a Houston airport and accused of sexual assault of a child, prosecutors said. Van Horn and Nassar, a former USA Gymnastics team doctor, were indicted in June on second-degree assault with the child, charges stemming from alleged incidents at the Curly Ranch where for decades numerous Olympians have trained. Van Horn and Nassar, a former USA Gymnastics team doctor, were indicted in June on second-degree sexual assault of a child, charges stemming from alleged incidents at the Curly Ranch where for decades numerous Olympians have trained. On October 2018, months after resigning, Steve Penny would be arrested following his indictment on Walker County, Texas on September 2018. said Mr. Penny had intentionally or knowingly destroyed or concealed records or documents from the Caroli Ranch, with intent to impair the availability as evidence into the investigation. Those documents, which law enforcement officials said have been delivered to Mr. Penny at USA Gymnastics headquarters in Indianapolis, have not been recovered. Penny was arrested immediately on October 17, 2018, with some survivors believing it was a victory, since he was responsible for mishandling evidence and documents with the FBI, USOC, and others involved with the Nassar investigation. The day following his arrest, USA Gymnastics placed Penny on its permanently ineligible list of members per the provisions in SafeSport Code for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement. In November 2018, the USOC filed a complaint seeking to revoke USAG status as a national governing body, or NGB, following the sexual abuse case from Nassar. USAG does not agree with the USOC. In December of 2018, USAG files for bankruptcy. On January 2019, a former gymnast tried to report verbal and emotional abuse from Twistars coach that did not include Gettert to USAG. USAG refuses to help because they say that since Twistars was in connection with sexual abuse in Larry Nassar, that it should go to SafeSport. Her and her mother make a complaint to SafeSport, and even though this complaint would have gone through USAG since it is not related to sexual abuse, John Gettert or Larry Nassar, they would not hear from SafeSport for another 2 years, unsure if the case was ever investigated. In February of 2019, the Michigan Attorney's Office announced that it's taking over a criminal investigation on John Gettert, reviewing all complaints from Twistars and Great Lakes Gymnastics. In March of 2019, Li Leong would become president and executive officer of USAG, becoming the fourth CEO in under 23 months. With a background in gymnastics, with her peak in 1988, she felt that herself could fix the organization since she felt a connection with the survivors of Larry Nassar. Gymnasts have sacrificed their childhood. Gymnasts were competing on broken bones, Leong said. As I was reading that, it was actually feeling like I was reading my memoir. I, too, to some degree, am a recovering gymnast, just like them. She spoke of the mental toughness of the sport and needing to find healthier ways to achieve it, especially because kids start the sport at such a young age. Athlete safety will be the paramount to what we do, Leong said. When I say safety, I'm talking about emotional, physical, and mental well-being. I'm talking about the whole package. Leong knows that riding USA Gymnastics will not be easy, calling it a tall mountain, but she believes in the sport and believes her experience, both professionally and as an athlete, will enable her to do it. I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't think I could be successful in it, she said. In April 2019, 200 former girls would settle an agreement with Gettert following the trial and abuse they endured while under his watch. Many gymnasts report coaches, and one of them recently making the USAG Hall of Fame, to SafeSport, and it is immediately investigated. People in the community again question why some cases are neglected for years, and others are immediately investigated by SafeSport. SafeSport, after investigating the case, states that they cannot help them and requests to send a report to USAG instead, since it does not pertain to sexual abuse. Days after receiving a report, USAG declined to help, stating that this was a SafeSport case and that it should be reported again to SafeSport only. That same month, Legacy Elite is under investigation by SafeSport. The gym, coached by Anna Lee and her family, practiced physical abuse on athletes. In one case, a gymnast was forced into the splits when she didn't perform a skill good enough on beam. One of the coaches, Wu, sat on the gymnast's back while pressing her into the splits without her consent. In September of 2019, Rachel DeHollander publishes the book, What's a Girl Worth?, detailing her journey of becoming a whistleblower of USAG and how she helped find justice for the hundreds of victims. In January 2020, The book Start by Believing is published, revealing details of Nassar's abuse. In the book, it discusses how Nassar would regularly take pictures of gymnasts during national meets and create scrapbooks to give them as gifts to the girls. In the book, a former trainer of USAG stated that he noticed after years of working with Nassar that he always was very protective of his computer and didn't allow others to use it. Another trainer interviewed was Tim McLean, who was a USAG trainer back in the 90s and 2000s. In the late 90s, the two were speaking about myofascial pain and dysfunction. A book was discussed that backed up his claims that internally touching a gymnast can relieve a muscle in the hip region. McLean said that this may not be a good technique because it is a child. Nassar agreed with McLean that he would never do this to his gymnasts because the technique would be inappropriate on young minors. In February of 2020, Maggie Haney and other coaches, including Victoria Levine, are under investigation for verbal and emotional abuse at MG Elite. Former gym for Olympian Lori Hernandez and national team member Riley McCusker. During the trial, Mark Busby was under file for his poor handling of the case. After months of delays and postponements of her trial, and waiting 3.5 years to act on the complaints, Busby gave the wrong date of when a decision would be made for her fate. The ruling, set for April 22nd, was mistaken to be announced for the 22nd. Busby did apologize for the misunderstanding, but many people didn't forgive him, since he made numerous excuses of why the trial was delayed. The trial, that was done by USAG SafeSport, resulted in Haney being suspended for 8 years. Since it was done through USAG SafeSport, people wondered if USAG had given her punishment as a scapegoat to fix USAG's image of poor handling from previous cases. Others think that she was forced punishment since a lawsuit against her was being filed for a gymnast that almost died under Haney's watch. If she weren't to receive punishment, the organization would look worse than before, since the only coach who had gymnasts die under his watch was Al Fong, which was decades ago. The topic of Fong still frustrates many, since he did not get a punishment from USAG. People became more frustrated when Haney's suspension was reduced from 8 to 5 years, months later, along with Victoria Levine still waiting for a trial. In March of 2020, Leslie Meadows reports her granddaughter's emotional abusive coach to USAG. USAG refuses to interview her 9-year-old granddaughter because USAG SafeSport does not interview children under the age of 14. Only parents or legal guardians may be interviewed on their behalf. In May of 2020, Sarah Rowland, former Chelsea Piers gymnast, created a Google file with complaints to USAG, including 47 testimonies from gymnasts. She struggled to submit the report, though. There should be a flowchart that tells you how to submit a report, and then what's going to happen and what the timeline is for the report, she said. Months later, she would find out that the person she filed a complaint to no longer worked for USAG. She was never informed that they left the organization. In July 2020, many current and former gymnasts began to speak up following SafeSport's poor handling of abuse and Mark Busby's terrible handlings of these gyms. Some people who spoke during the Gym Alliance movement were welcomed with open arms for speaking up. Others were silenced and threatened. Kaylee Gallant, former gymnast from Kurt Thomas Gym, was told by an attorney of the gym to remove the post. The gym representative stated she must remove this because her claims were false, without merit. Gallant, who had filed a report to USA officials years before the Gym Alliance movement, would wait 2.5 years for the case to close. Later, she would find out that they could not give her a proper closure and punishment because her coach, Kurt Thomas, had passed away in 2020 before the case had closed. Kim Krantz, USAG Chief of Athlete Wellness, would tell Gallant's lawyers that since her abuse was before SafeSport was founded, that there would be no punishment. USAG was not in the business of righting past wrongs, referring to making sure current athletes were safe and not past athletes. Gallant, who tried to reach out to a gymnastic judge in 2009 about abuse, was silenced even though the judge taught safety courses. She stated, how she was prescribed diet pills by Thomas and forced to wear trash bag suits to lose weight. In August of 2020, Alexis Buessler, former gymnast of Cincinnati Gymnastics Academy, accused Mary Lee Tracy of emotional abuse. Tracy denied in an email that these memories ever happened. USAG SafeSport posted earlier that month that they would conduct an investigation if they saw abuse posts on social media. Alexis' mother, Michelle, waited to see if USAG would reach out to them, given that Tracy was a former Olympic coach in the 1990s and a current national team coach. They would not reach out to Michelle, though. Michelle filed a report shortly after and was told by Nancy Ostring, USAG investigator, that it would be sent over to the Center for Safe Sport. In November of 2020, following Li Leung's CEO position, established in December of 2020, USAG's Athlete Bill of Rights was among the first of its kind in the sport. Leung said, Leung was voted vice chair of the NGB Council of U.S. Olympic Sport governing bodies in October of 2020 and was elected to the Executive Committee of the International Gymnastics Federation, or FIG, in November of 2021. In December of 2020, where Don Peters used to teach, gymnasts were regularly physically and emotionally abused. Many parents and gymnasts, like Ashton Woodsbury, claimed that the Azarian way was children being slapped so hard that it resulted in 5 stars on their legs. One child, who suffered panic attacks, was so bad that she was put on a heart monitor while in the hospital. When I started, the very first thing I learned about was punishment and breaking kids down. Azarian coach Rina Shikuma wrote in a complaint to USA Gymnastics. In my own opinion, after witnessing Vanessa punishing and belittling and making fun of kids and verbally and emotionally abusing girl after girl, year after year, I think she should be banned from the sport, Rina said when she wrote in a complaint to USA Gymnastics. A 3-month investigation based on formal complaints, interviews, Azarian and previously undisclosed confidential USA Gymnastics documents, medical records, and therapist reports found that some Azarian coaches regularly, physically, emotionally, and verbally abused, bullied, and belittled young female gymnasts and pressured them to continue training and or competing while injured. It was brought up to USAG and Mark Busby to do the right thing, but justice was not served. USA Gymnastics will give notice to and consult with each person reportedly harmed by the misconduct if USA Gymnastics enters it into agree-upon resolution, according to USAG SafeSport investigation and procedures listed on the organization's website, the day victims and their families were first informed of the agreement. The procedure was in place during USA Gymnastics' investigation into the allegations against the Azarian coaches. Unfortunately, those victims and family members were not interviewed, and a decision was made without those complaining being able to give statements. After victims' parents and other whistleblowers complained to Busby and USA Gymnastics, Chief of Athlete Wellness, Kim Krantz, that the organization had violated its own procedures, the wording was changed on the USA Gymnastics website to read, USA Gymnastics Safe Sport may give notice to each person reportedly harmed by the Safe Sport violation if USA Gymnastics Safe Sport enters into the agreed-upon resolution. USA Gymnastics Safe Sport may, in its discretion, provide notice of the agreed-upon resolution to reporting parties and witnesses. So Busby and USAG refused to apologize to the Azarian victims and decided upon a poor punishment which required 50 hours of positive coaching courses, feeling that improving their coaching would be sufficient punishment. They were all placed on an interim suspension while the courses were being completed. At the time, more and more gyms were getting public discrimination, like Anna Lee, and their reputable gyms were becoming scarce. Busby did not want to ban or suspend Azarian coaches because he felt there was a shortage of qualified coaches, which is why USAG resulted in giving the coaches courses to complete. Under what a top USA gymnastic official described as a negotiated resolution, Gonzalez, Davies, and Hensley were allowed to return to coaching with supervision as soon as they completed a 50-hour positive coaching course, according to USA Gymnastics documents. Their interim suspensions would be lifted upon their completion of additional virtual learning sessions and other measures. What they didn't know was that the coaches would find loopholes and not do the courses themselves, merely having other people, like parents, complete it for them because they didn't have time to do it themselves. Gonzalez was back to coaching 2 days after USAG announced its decision. In January of 2021, USAG put out a statement that Busby left the organization, returning to work at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. Earlier this month, Mark Busby, USA Gymnastics SafeSport legal counsel, announced his decision to leave the organization, the statement said. His last day was January 15, 2021. We greatly appreciate Mark's 3+ years of service and wish him the best on his future. I hope USAG finds a successor to replace Mr. Busby that is more understanding and compassionate with the victims, said Rena Shikuma, a former coach at Azarian U.S. Gymnastics Training Center, who filed a complaint with USA Gymnastics in 2020, alleging that 3 coaches at the gym had physically, verbally, and emotionally abused young female gymnasts. Several families were treated unjustly, and I felt the entire process was being handled improperly after hearing many were being left out of the hearing process. As a whistleblower, I was disappointed with how I was treated unfairly and hope USAG will not treat other whistleblowers with the same disrespect that I was shown. On February 25, 2021, Geddard would finally get his punishment. Geddard was charged with 24 felonies by Michigan state officials, 20 counts of human trafficking and forced labor, 1 count of second-degree sexual assault, racketeering, and lying to a police officer. Geddard, who lied about sex abuse in his gym from Larry, also lied about the testimony of Maroney being abused by Nassar in 2011. He said that he did not recall the conversation that he had in the car while in Tokyo. On February 25th, the day he was supposed to turn himself in, he refused. Geddard committed suicide by shotgun, family concern of why his GPS wasn't showing that he was in Eaton County. Geddard would not face any time in jail. Geddard, the 2012 U.S. Olympic gymnastic coach with ties to disgraced sports doctor Larry Nassar, killed himself Thursday, hours after being charged with turning his Michigan gym into a hub of human trafficking by coercing girls to train and then abuse them, authorities said. The charges were the latest fallout from the sexual abuse scandal involving Nassar, a former Michigan State University sports doctor who is now in prison. Geddard was the head coach of the 2012 U.S. Olympic women's gymnastic team that earned gold medals. He was long associated with Nassar, who was the Olympic team doctor and also treated injured gymnasts at Twistars, Geddard's Lansing area gym. Among the charges, Geddard was accused of lying to investigators in 2016 if he ever heard complaints about Nassar. But the bulk of the case against him involved his gym and how he treated the young athletes whose family paid to have them train under him. Geddard was suspended by Indianapolis-based USAG during the Nassar scandal. He told families in 2018 that he was retiring. Sarah Klein, a gymnast who trained under Geddard for more than 10 years and was assaulted by Nassar, said the coach's death was an escape from justice and traumatizing beyond words. In March of 2021, a former gymnast from Twistars had reported coaches to SafeSport and was finally contacted 2 years later. SafeSport stated that the case was opened that month and that it had been wrapped up in under a month of investigating. No details were provided of how the investigation would be resolved to her. Following the poor handling of SafeSport, CEO Lili Leung made a statement. She said that progress has been made in reforming how coaches are investigated, writing, "We know that the SafeSport investigation and resolution process must be faster in the future, and we have made significant changes to our SafeSport department and process to make it more efficient. We have, for example, significantly increased department personnel, staffed a chief of athlete wellness position, and invested in better reporting software, all within the last few years." While we are seeing the benefits of these and other changes, including a 69% reduction in active cases in 2020, drastically reduced time to closure for all SafeSport cases, we will continue to make improvements until our athletes and our community are more confident in this process. On March 19, 2021, frustrated with Mark Busby's poor punishment with Azarian, 3 former Azarian gymnasts, including Ashton Woodsby, sue Azarian for abuse that the gym allowed for years. That same month, Maggie Haney would sue USAG in an attempt to overturn her suspension. In April of 2021, a third coach was under investigation by USAG from Legacy Elite. Justice has still not been served. In July of 2021, a Sports Illustrated article discusses the problems between USAG and SafeSport's governing body. Those who spoke to Sports Illustrated remain frustrated. The first systematic hurdle they described encountering was figuring out which organization to report to. The U.S. Center for SafeSport, which was launched by the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee in March of 2017, tackles all allegations of sexual abuse within the Olympic movement. Most other claims of mistreatment go to the USA Gymnastics internal SafeSport department. No, they are not the same thing. Hence, the attendant confusion. The complicated matters further. Sometimes, the USAG Safe Sports Department may refer a case to the U.S. Center for Safe Sport to handle instead. In the article, it exposes many examples of how USAG has failed to find justice for athletes and how many gyms, like Empire, or coaches, like Mary Lee Tracy, continue to coach for years while under investigation with no suspension. The article also states that the CEO of SafeSport, Reese Collin, states that there is a lot more conflict of interest when reports are given from USAG, and that this is one of the only times that cases are elevated for gymnastics. An example of this could include Valeri Lukin, since he is running for a top position in USAG. The article also discusses the thin lines with filing a report through USAG SafeSport. A Texas mom who wanted to remain anonymous stated that when she tried to fill out a report on USAG, it only gave her room to select one day when the abuse occurred. Although there were numerous dates that she was abused by her coaches, the text is difficult to understand. It doesn't outline what complaints can be expected as the process unfolds. She stated, the article gives advice on how to fix the organization, comparing hockey SafeSport that bases cases on state and not by the nation. This way, cases are investigated quicker. It also states that in hockey, clubs have a parent that volunteers to serve as a SafeSport representative who is trained in conjunction with state coordinates to increase monitoring in the club.